So, welcome everyone. So this is going to be infrastructure diagram, as the name suggests here. And what we are going to see today here within this particular session. So let us say if someone is going to ask you that there is a website, maybe www.burger.com. There is any website, right? We can pick any name. Fine. So there is an interview question that how does your website work or what is your infrastructure architecture? So when we need to explain this particular component, so what are the things usually comes into mind? So the very first thing which comes into mind here is there is an actor, right? This actor is going to type in the particular website name into browser, right? And what happens? So the journey begins from here. Now what happens, guys? Any idea about like how does website work and how do we resolve a website? And usually people have a particular question like how will you design three-tier architecture and all these sort of questions will be there within your interview, right? So what we are going to understand here is if there is a website like burger.com or maybe servergan.com, maybe google.com or whatever, so how do we manage that particular thing, right? So these sort of things we are going to discuss today. And aside to it, what are the components we are going to choose? Moreover, there is one more interview question which is usually asked. Okay, why did you select this component only? So these are the things which we are going to discuss today. And tomorrow onwards, or maybe next class onwards, what we are going to do, we are going to discuss individual components, like how we have set it up and what are the reason behind selecting it. So we are not only supposed to tell that what are the components we are using, but yes, guys, we are supposed to tell them that yes, if we have selected this, then what was the reason behind it? Are we clear on that, guys? So this is going to be agenda of today's session that we are going to discuss, and let us begin with it. So guys, if you have any question in between, you can ask. You are always free to ask questions, right? So guys, as soon as a person is going to enter the domain name into like a browser, so what happens? Is there anyone who can help me with that? Anyone?
I think the request will go for to the DNS first,
Right?
and then DNS will route accordingly where the location will be there for the server. If like it's an A record, then
Okay.
it will route it to it will provide the A record, I mean the IP address of the server, and then
Okay.
the user will try to access the website. The first thing that will happen.
Fine, great, sounds good, very good. So now let us understand that how does infrastructure work in really depth manner? Because obviously like giving an overview is not going to actually work here. We will have to understand the things in detail, right? So this is very first question which people usually ask. Obviously that will be depending on the like requirement as well, that the sort of requirement that organization has where you are facing that interview, right? But end of the day, you will have to face these sort of questions for sure. So as soon as you enter a particular domain name into browser, so what happens there is, obviously there is a particular PC or maybe laptop where you are going to type in the things. So how does it work? First of all, guys, we need to start from very scratch things. First of all, if there is a laptop, right? So within that laptop, there are major four components which are usually configured in order to make that work, in order to make that accessible over internet, right? So very first thing here is like an particular system has IP address, and obviously there is particular NIC. We can type in here network interface card, which is known as LAN card as well. Within this like network interface card or NIC, what are the components? What are the particular software configuration we have? So the very first thing is that IPv. Usually we have IPv4 as of today within our LAN cards. It could be possible within a rare scenario or within a required scenario, we might have IPv6 as well, right? But as of now, you are not going to tell that we have IPv4 or we have IPv6. But for your information, you should always keep that thing in mind, right? Then after we have IPv4, after that we have subnet mask. We have subnet mask here. And what other component do we have, guys, here? Gateway. And after that, we have DNS. So guys, this is the very first DNS which is responsible to resolve the domain name. The burger.com which I type into my browser, so that will be resolved with the help of this particular DNS, right? If somehow this DNS is not able to resolve the request, then what it is going to do? It is going to send the request to next DNS. So next DNS will be related to maybe your ISP. Because definitely what DNS do we configure here? So there are different type of DNS we will discuss at the time of Route 53 discussion. When we will discuss about Route 53 and other components, we will discuss that particular part. Okay, there is a question like who configures DNS on our laptop? So there are two ways to configure. So first of all, let us say if you are using your router or maybe you are using your Wi-Fi. So there is a particular term known as DHCP. Let me type that in here. So there is a particular concept you can configure IP address in two ways. Either that could be static or that could be dynamic. For dynamic configuration, we use DHCP server. And your router, your Wi-Fi router, which is placed in your home, so that works as a dynamic host configuration protocol that provides you the IP address. So usually DHCP is the particular protocol or the particular service which is responsible to configure DNS into your LAN card. Or if it could be possible that if you have any static configuration, then you can configure it yourself, right? So DHCP is the one which is usually used in order to configure like IP address, subnet mask, gateway, and DNS within our LAN card, right? So this is our first DNS server which we have within our LAN card. Information is provided. If this is not going to work, then obviously information will be gathered from your ISP DNS. So your ISP DNS is going to be responsible for it. ISP means internet service provider, the particular vendor where from you have purchased your internet connection. That is known as ISP. Every single ISP, whenever they are going to provide you details, so they are going to provide you a couple of things like IP address. Second thing is subnet mask, gateway, and a DNS. They will provide. So if this DNS, your local DNS, does not have information about burger.com, then information will be searched on this particular ISP DNS. Now, let us say for hypothetical situation, if this ISP also does not know about this particular website, which is burger.com, or that could be any, right? That could be servergyan.com or that could be any. Let me type in here servergyan.com as well. Okay, so if it is going to be servergyan.com, so what would happen in that particular case? So guys, we are going to go to our ISP DNS. If that does not have information, then the information will be searched on nearby ISP. Nearby ISP, we will look at nearby ISP DNS. We will look for. If that does not have information, we can go to maybe google.com, Google DNS. We can go to. If Google also does not have information, then it will go to root DNS server. Now, guys, what is root DNS server? So root DNS server, if you talk about what are the like top level domains. So guys, overall 13 root level domains are available like .com, .edu, like as you see here, .net, .gov, .edu, .org. These sort of like 13 top level domains are available, and these are increasing. Actually, it's like as you can see, multiple domains are running with .io, .ed, .xyz, .abc. Multiple domains are available as of today. But initially we had only 14 root level domains, right? So request will be forwarded to root DNS server. Now, root DNS server is responsible to resolve the particular domain registrar. So the particular organization, let us say we can talk about here like Philip, we can talk about here your GoDaddy, we can talk about here any other maybe namecheap.com, we can talk about here maybe Amazon or maybe any other one, right? So domain registrar will be responsible to let us know that where from the domain has been registered, right? So it could be GoDaddy, it could be your google.com, maybe name.com, maybe namecheap.com, any domain registrar, whatever you want. Maybe whois.com is also domain registrar as of today. So root DNS server will let us know that domain registrar is maybe godaddy.com. Now we will go to GoDaddy. We will go here, and this particular domain registrar will let us know that where the website is hosted. Now, if this is the first time we are trying to access servergyan.com into our browser, then the request will be redirected to our like hosted DNS. Like there are websites, so that particular DNS server will be responsible to resolve our domain names record.
Okay, so I have a question here. So I have a question here.
Please.
Sorry to interrupt. Actually, sir, if we have configured DNS 8.8.8.8, which is a Google DNS in our PC,
right?
then will the request go to ISP DNS? I don't think so, because I think
No,
directly
no,
the
no,
request
no,
would go
no.
to the Google DNS.
In that case, as I told you, because see what happens, your ISP DNS is always near to you rather than Google DNS. End of the day, whatever request you are making through your laptop, so definitely those requests will definitely be redirected via your ISP. So rather than you are searching your data on ISP DNS, you are directly reaching out to like Google DNS. In that case, your request will not be like routed through your ISP DNS and maybe your NISP DNS.
Okay.
So there will be a little high latency, but yes, chances of resolving request will be like higher. Why it is so? Because we can rely on Google DNS like more than that of our ISP DNS. It could be possible that if our ISP DNS is down, so it could be possible that we might not be able to resolve the request, right? But yes,
Okay.
keep this thing in mind. If you are going to point DNS of Google, so chances of resolving a domain will be higher. But in that case, there will be a couple of more like millisecond latency will be there.
Okay, so DNS IP would be configured on the router that we are using, through that it is providing us, through the
Yes, yes,
DHCP
yes.
protocol,
You
it's
are right.
providing us the DNS IP in
Yes,
the
you are
right
right.
router. Okay.
And these IP addresses related to DNS are configured by your DHCP, because whenever we start your laptops, it could be possible that every single time you are getting a separate IP address. You are getting a different IP address on the top of your maybe mobile, laptop, desktop, or whatever it is, right? Because usually we prefer to have DHCP protocol, which is known as Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So this is used in order to configure IP, subnet, gateway, and DNS within our network interface card. So now, guys, this is how we get IP address of our website. So this is going to resolve the particular domain name. I hope that the particular concept is clear, guys.
Yes.
Okay, let me place it in a separate location. Right. Now, what happens? Finally, we have got a particular IP address which we are going to use where our website is hosted, right? So now we have a particular IP address. Now, what sort of IP address is that? So it could be possible that DNS server, and for DNS guys, you can define here that a request will be redirected to route50.com, because let us say if you are using a serverguard.com and this is hosted on Amazon, so you can define here that you are using Route 53. This is a DNS service on the top of AWS. You can define that first, as soon as a particular actor or maybe a customer is going to enter serverguard.com into browser, then request will be routed to route53.com, because that is our domain name server. Once it is resolved from there, then request will be redirected to one of the load balancer. We have ELB. Now there could be a question that what IP address you are going to point against your domain name server. So guys, keep this thing in mind. Rather than pointing a particular what should I say, IP address, what we configure here is we configure the ELB alias, ELB DNS name. So you can define a particular component that rather than configuring an IP address against my website, what do we do here is as a record, we configure alias record, right? So alias record is maybe like you can call that sg.com rather than calling serverguard.com. You can define here sg.com, right? So we can configure their alias record, and against that alias record, we are going to point the particular DNS name, ELB DNS name. So if you have ever worked with AWS, so definitely you know very well, whenever we create a load balancer, we get a DNS name against that particular load balancer, right? So rather than pointing any single IP address against this domain name, we will point the request that whenever it is www.serverguard.com, then request will be forwarded to the domain name IP, domain name of that particular load balancer, right? Now this is load balancer. Rather than calling here ELB only, we can define we are using application. We can say here that we are using application load balancer, because guys, when we will discuss these individual components within AWS, so we will discuss about that what are the types of domain name we have, like what is use of application load balancer, why do we use network load balancer, why do we use classic load balancer, and there is another type of load balancer available which is known as gateway or maybe IP load balancer, right? So for now you are going to say that we are using application load balancer here. Why we are using it, I will tell you within some time. Okay, now these are application load balancer. After it, definitely guys, what we are using here is we are using one more component which is known as target group. So these target group will include EC2 machines. For now, you can assume that EC2 machines are running inside these target groups. As soon as request will be redirected from this particular DNS to this particular application load balancer. So as soon as request will come here, so this is going to forward request to these EC2 machines which are registered under this particular target group. Right? Now, guys, there is a particular question that what is the architecture of your application? So guys, usually we are going to say that we have 3-tier architecture, right? So these particular instances will be running with any type of web server, right? For example, you can talk about your Apache or maybe Nginx, right? So these sort of web server you might explain, but obviously guys, when you are going to tell about Apache or Nginx, so at least configuration of these web server you should be knowing, right? Like how many concurrent connections are allowed, like how do you secure your Apache web server, like what is particular maximum client wide size, what is maximum like request size, right? These sort of parameters you should be knowing in order to like let your interviewer know that yes, you have configured it yourself. Okay. Then after, when we are talking about these sort of configuration servers, so we might talk about Nginx, Apache, these sort of web servers we might talk about. After that, guys, when we have a load balancer here, so obviously guys, multiple other servers which are going to be related to, rather than typing your app, we can define your web servers. Over here, we are going to define your app servers. Okay. Okay guys, so we have application servers here, but what happens, definitely guys, when we are using maybe multiple EC2 machines here, obviously we will talk about like how do we define number of instances here within coming sessions. But for now guys, we are going to talk about that we have web servers behind first load balancer. Then after guys, we have another target group. And obviously guys, another target group will need either same load balancer or either we can create here now. When we are going to talk about that we have this load balancer, we can add one more component like we are using internet facing. We can define here like we are using internet facing load balancer here. Why it is so? All the requests which are coming directly from DNS, these are being resolved or these are being taken care by this particular load balancer. Once again, we will have once again a load balancer here. It could be application load balancer, it could be network load balancer that will be defined based on the type of application you are going to have. So guys, once again, you are going to have a load balancer here. So this load balancer is going to be maybe internal load balancer. This is going to be internal load balancer. Why it is so guys? So we need to understand this concept that as soon as we are going to configure these target groups guys, so these target groups, the particular web servers are going to forward traffic to these EC2 machines. And as you know that the number of instances may increased or reduced based on the requirement. But aside to that, the IP address of this instance will keep on changing. So it will become very hard for us to ensure that the particular exact and the correct IP address of these application servers are pointed under these web servers configuration files, right? So what do we do here is rather than defining EC2 machine IP address here, what do we do here is we will create one internal load balancer. And once again, we are going to get the DNS name of it. So that DNS name we are going to point under this particular web server configuration. So as soon as request would come here on this particular web server, so based on the like routing path and based on the particular API call and all, so we will have to forward the request to these particular target groups here. Yes, now you have a question. Now your question, please.
Yeah, actually, I would like to ask that this group is for.
You are on mute, Neha. I don't know why.
Hello.
Yes, now you are. We can hear you.
Yeah, I would like to ask what is this group for? I joined recently only.
Okay, so this particular group is related to it, like DevOps interview preparation. Those guys who have already gone through some sort of trainings and they do not have like real hands-on, and like they would like to like prepare for the interview, what sort of interview questions could be there. So we are going to discuss about that within this particular session.
All right. So do you teach about Python as well?
No, Python is not covered under here.
All right. And any other programming languages like Java?
No. So Neha, we are going to cover these tools here like Jenkins, Git, Ansible, and maybe Docker container, Apache Web Server,
Okay, fine.
MySQL, EKS, Linux, AWS. We are going to cover these things here within this session. So I hope that that answers your question. So okay, guys. Now once again, now this is this is two-tier architecture. Now this is first tier of the first tier of servers where we are processing the data of, where we are processing request of customer. This is second tier. Now what is third tier, guys? So within third tier of architecture, guys, we are going to use some database here. So guys, this is going to be database, right? For handling this database, once again there could be a situation here, and guys, this is very scalable architecture which I'm going to tell you. So we have a database here, but guys, if we have only single database, that will once again become a problematic stuff for us. Why it is so? If there is high number of requests, we need to increase, or we need to add more read-only replicas. So what do we configure here, guys? So keep this thing in mind. The very first thing we are going to have here, MasterDB. Master MySQL we are going to have here, right? This is database layer, right? Moreover, we have slave. And could be possible that we might have multiple slaves here, and based on the requirement we might keep on adding others. So guys, how we are going to define this particular component into our application? Any idea about? Because these application servers will be coordinating with these servers. We have three now, we have master and we have two slaves. So how we are going to define this particular thing within our application, that if it is read query, it should be it should be going to this server. If it is write query, it should be going to this server. Any idea, guys? Yes, guys. Any idea? Sanjay? Azlan, any idea about?
Within the application, I think it would be defined that if it's a read query, then it would be routed to that server on that C name, or if it's a write query, then that would be routed to that C name, other C name, which is the master.
Akshay, any view on it?
No, actually, not able to get this.
Okay, not a problem. Let me tell. So what happens whenever a user is trying to browse any website? So at that moment, there are two things. Either a user is going to update something or going to read something. For example, if you have your bank account, right, and you are trying to perform some sort of transaction. So if you are going to withdraw your account, if you are going to withdraw, maybe you are going to transfer amount from your account to some other ones. So that will be an update query. But for example, if you are just checking your balance, that is going to be read query. For example, if we talk about in case of Flipkart, for example, if you are working as a vendor, you are working as a merchant, and you are going to add a product, that will be update query, that will be insert query. But let us say if you are going to check whether your product is up to date or not, right, that is going to be read request. So how do we handle that? If it is a read, so that should be sent to master. If it is slave, or if it is read, so how it is going to be on your slave server. So guys, there is a particular other component which we will have to introduce here, that is known as proxy SQL. Proxy SQL server. There is going to be another server, as you know, we are going to have a load balancer. So this particular proxy SQL server works as a load balancer for these particular databases, right? If it will ensure that if the particular request is read, So this particular is going to work based on the particular server IDs. We have to define like server IDs on this, because see, whenever we talk about like master and slave replication, so every single server works with the server ID itself, right? We will discuss about in MySQL session that why do we define, how do we configure master slave application and all, right? But guys, we need to understand this particular thing first of all, that we have a proxy SQL, and in order to like make it fault redundant, we are going to have two proxy SQLs, right? Two proxy SQL server. Let us say if due to any reason, if this server goes down, so what would happen? Like each and every request will be stopped at this particular single point of failure only. And when we are talking about like highly available architecture, so we are always supposed to have at least two proxy SQL server, that if one goes down, another one should be there. Are we clear with this? So it means these two proxy
Sir, this cannot be set up within the application, that the query will be routed, read queries will be routed to the
this
read only.
can be configured, but actually in that particular case, every single time we are going to define the particular like database server IP address, we will have to define all the queries as well.
Okay.
So it will become very, very hard for the developers.
Also, sir, the proxy SQL server that you're talking about, is it available in RDS or is it a part of something
This is
else?
not available in RDS. This is a separate component.
Okay.
Sir,
This is a separate component.
Okay.
Where read replica comes into picture here, or
Okay, now in order to make it highly available, what we are going to do here, guys, we will have a particular network load balancer. Why we are talking about here network load balancer, guys? So as you know that network load balancer provides very high throughput and low latency. Right, guys? Network load balancer is going to provide very high throughput and low latency here. That is why we are going to use a network load balancer, and these two servers will be put within a target group, and that target group will be associated with this particular network load balancer. Now, whenever we need to configure that what is going to be database IP address, so right now we have the DNS endpoint of this network load balancer, so all the application servers will be accessing this network load balancer in order to access database. Now we are going to set some sort of rules here within proxy SQL server, that if it is select, only then it is supposed to be sent on to these servers in round robin manner. So obviously like on these two like SQL server, we can define the particular load and it should be equally distributed here, right? Moreover, if any query rather than select, then it should be forwarded to master, because if it is maybe update, insert, alter, delete, any sort of query we are going to execute, that query will be executed on this particular master server. Guys, are we clear with this?
Yes, sir.
Are we clear so far with this particular architecture, guys?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Any questions? Any question, guys?
No.
Yash, any question?
No, sir, no.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. If you don't have any question, it means everything is clear.
Yes.
Right. Okay, guys. So now what we are going to discuss here is we are going to talk about, okay, these EC2 machines are working properly. So how do you handle number of servers here? So obviously, guys, we will have to introduce here one more component, which is known as auto scaling. As you know that we have a particular component in AWS which is known as auto scaling. So these target groups will be configured along with AWS auto scaling, right? And there are three values here, and which are known as like maximum,
desired.
and desired. These three values are here. So first of all, obviously we will have this particular target like auto scaling group configured here as well. Like wherever we have target group and we need to define number of servers should be scaled, no requirement, we will have auto scaling group on the top of this particular target group as well. And guys, keep this thing in mind there can be a particular cross question. We can do a common load balancer for all these target groups. So guys, every single target group is going to have a separate load balancer. Why it is so? Auto scaling group is a free service and that handles only one target group at a time. Although it could be possible that you have such a requirement that wherein this target group is associated with two different or the particular servers which are associated here. So these are configured with two different target groups here. So when we are talking about this particular component, so guys, it could be possible we might have two different target groups which could be handled by the single auto scaling group. So that sort of scenario we will discuss later on for sure. Because when we are working in highly resilience manner, when we are talking about quality of services, so in that case, we need to ensure that if any service is available, which is running in our environment, that is not supposed to go down in any case. Right, guys? So it could be possible that multiple target groups can be associated with a single auto scaling group. We will discuss those scenarios later on. So guys, we have auto scaling group. As soon as you will talk about auto scaling group, so guys, there is going to be another question. Let me explain that right away. That what particular component of AWS you use in order to configure auto scaling group? Launch configuration or launch template? So guys, this is a question for you. What is launch configuration and what is launch template and what is difference here?
I think in launch template we have a versioning system that if there is anything change in the template, I mean in the AMI or any change whatever we do, then a new version gets created for that, and we can revert that whenever we want, which is not possible in launch configuration.
Yes, what do you think of it?
So as Azlan told, basically we will have a versions of that whatsoever updates we will have. We will keep the versions in launch template.
Okay. So guys, let me tell you the major use case here. So within launch configuration, we can have only one type of EC2 machine. What does it mean, one type of EC2 machine? For example, if your requirement is that you want to have C5.4x large instances to be running within your this particular target group, which is going to be this one, right? And let us say you are working in such a region, maybe let's call it Mumbai, for example. Although this is very in rare cases, but for a hypothetical example, we can take that sort of scenario that M5.4x large instances are not available within that availability zone where your AWS auto scaling group is trying to create instance for you. What would happen? Your AWS auto scaling group will start sending you messages that unable to create instances. So what would happen in that case? The type of EC2 machine which you have selected are not available and your AWS auto scaling group will not be in a position to create instances for you. Because you have selected here AWS launch configuration, like AWS configuration only, like launch configuration, right? So in order to have different type of EC2 machines which can be spinned up within your target group in order to run the services properly, you can opt launch template instead of launch configuration. So AWS launch template supports multiple type of instances. One more thing is here. Let us say you have defined here that if C5.4x large instances are not available, launch M5.4x large. If that is not available, launch R5.4x large. Why it is so? Because you have a minimum number of requirement like 16 CPU you would like to have within your instances, right? But the scenario here is AWS ensures that the particular cheapest instance will be launched first. Right, guys? AWS will ensure that the cheapest instance will be launched first. For example, if we talk about three, C5.4x large, M5.4x large, and R5.4x large. So C5 is the cheaper one, M5 is a little costlier, and R5 is much costlier, right? So AWS is going to ensure that the cheapest instance will be launched first. But guys, keep this thing in mind. If that instance is not available, and you would like to ensure that yes, your service is up and running, so you can opt in order to pay extra money to AWS, but your service will not go down. So that is why we use launch template instead of launch configuration. Are we clear with that, guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Any question here, guys? I would like to explain because this is really critical component what we are discussing right now. Because these sort of questions are usually discussed during interview. Any question, guys? Abhishek, any question? Akshay?
No, sir.
Great, sounds good. Okay,
No.
so guys, what next we are going to discuss here? So the particular maximum, minimum and desired value. So how do you decide this value? Your inputs, please. Yes, guys, your input, please.
Sir, minimum requirement and the maximum when we get a maximum load, so we put maximum number of hosts to prevent extra charges or to prevent unlimited and minimum we allocate to provide minimum resources to keep the service going. And desirable means like we make like when first time we create an instance, so auto scaling group automatically create the desired resources, and auto scale group try to keep the desired desired resources maintained in any case. Yeah.
Yes, you are right. So let me elaborate it more so as you shall be in a position to explain these sort of things to your interviewer, right? So guys, rather than saying that obviously in order to save cost and other stuff, definitely that is part of like DevOps team profile. But guys, based on the cost, we do not define number of instances here. So guys, now we need to understand one more component here like type of infra. So guys, when we talk about type of infrastructure, there are different type of components available. There are different type of environment, or rather than calling it like infra, we should call it environment. Okay, so the very first here is that is known as dev. It means all the developers, they keep on like working their stuff here, right? Second is going to be your QA, it means quality assurance environment is going to be there, right? All the like testing team, like test engineer, right? They work here. Then after we have a particular environment known as SIT, which is known as system integration test. Right, guys? On next environment here is SIT. So guys, what does SIT mean? It means system integration test. Like whenever you are going to deploy any component into production environment, so that component will be deployed first here. And there is a term known here as load testing. So what does it mean load testing? So let us say you have a plan that you are going to create here the particular type of instance you are going to have. So these are going to be maybe C5, C5.2x large. These are the particular type of instances which you are going to use within your production environment. So what you will do, you will create same type of infrastructure within this environment as well. And you will have to ensure that how much load and how many requests per second these instances are able to handle. Obviously, you are not going to create same infrastructure as you are going to use in production. Let us say you are going to have maybe 10 instances there. So maybe you will have only 2 here in order to do load testing, because on 2 instances, you will get to know like what sort of throughput you are going to get. How many requests per second these servers are going to handle, what sort of parameters you are going to tune here. So every sort of testing will be done on SIT. It means system integration testing environment. That is known as SIT. After that, you have a particular prod environment, pre-prod. What does it mean? So like application which are going to be configured, this is going to be pointing to maybe your production environment. Database can be used in common, but guys, yes, keep this thing in mind. This particular environment will be accessible only to your internal users, maybe to your business team, to the particular product owners, to QA team and all. But guys, keep this thing in mind. Pre-prod environment is never exposed to end customers. There are some customized URL which are configured within the application, within the particular, like internal users only are supposed to be accessing those sort of URLs here, right? Because before sending any particular code or any sort of application into production, so most of organizations prefer to have sort of pre-prod environment where they can test the particular things like how things are going to work in production environment. Are we clear with this?
Yes.
Yes.
So this particular environment, like SIT, like system integration environment, is going to be responsible to let us know, okay, as we know very well that our sales team, our business team can confirm that how much traffic we are expecting, because let us say if they are going to have a campaign. For example, you might have seen that whenever there is a sale on Flipkart, Amazon, or maybe any other website, so they keep on promoting the stuff like maybe 2 weeks before, right? And as soon as the particular sales comes like near, so like promotion goes more and more high. So they know particular component like how many users are reading the emails, how many users are visiting website, and what is expected traffic, right? So based on that expectation and based on the particular recommendation given from your sales or from your business team side, you know very well that how many users are supposed to visit your website, right? Based on that particular number, and based on the particular test result published in this particular environment, you are going to calculate. Obviously, this is going to be a mathematical calculation. For example, we are expecting 25,000 users, concurrent users we are going to have. And these like 2 servers are able to handle 5,000 concurrent users. So obviously, we are going to have 5 times servers. So minimum number of servers are going to be 10 here. Because the capacity of these servers are only 2,000 users per server, we are going to have 25,000. So we are going to have maybe 25 servers here, right?
Sir, I have a question here.
Please.
So the thing is that, we have multiple type of servers. For example, I put it like, T2 micro type of servers. Like you say, the 10 servers. Okay. So how we calculate, like what sort of size we have to put and how many servers? Like you tell me, like, we can calculate like by users, but we have a CPU, like different kind of CPUs. And then we have to choose the number of CPUs. So is there any mechanism or is there any tool where we can calculate this sort of stuff? Or this is like hit and trial, we start application and see how the CPU react and all these things?
Yes, I was coming to that particular part only, but yes, that is really a nice question. Thank you for asking. So Sanjay, how do we configure, how do we decide this sort of thing? So when a developer starts developing the application, they know very well what type of application they are developing. Maybe it is Java based, maybe it is Go, maybe they are developing the application on maybe Elasticsearch sort of like application they are going to use. So there are different categories of applications. Maybe these are going to be CPU intensive. Let us say if it is Go. So Go is going to be CPU intensive, right? If it is going to be Java, it is going to be memory intensive. And let us say we are going to use Redis, we are going to use Elasticsearch. So these are really memory intensive applications. So at the time of like selecting a particular application which is going to be used in your environment, so we have to define whether it is going to be CPU intensive or it is going to be memory intensive, right? So what type of application we are going to choose for our environment? At that moment, we have to decide whether it is CPU or memory intensive, maybe disk IO intensive. So that sort of component we need to keep in mind before selecting an instance type.
Okay.
Sanjay, does that answer your question?
So the thing is that, so developer will going to tell us that, my application is, for example, CPU intensive. Okay.
Yes.
So now our job start, like, so like, for example, developer says like, yes, I developed this website and this application, this is a CPU intensive application, like I developed in a Go or Java, and 20,000 people will come and visit this website or visit this application. Now our job will start come. Okay, is it right?
Right.
Okay, so
So
now
Sanjay, one more thing I would like to tell you here. So let us say the developer is going to say that, okay, my application needs at least 8 CPU, right? So that
okay,
will
so
be
developer
our
will
job.
tell you.
Because the 8 CPUs are available within T2 series as well, T3 series as well, and C series as well, right? And maybe in your M series as well. 8 CPUs are available everywhere. But yeah,
So
now being DevOps and being AWS experts, we are supposed to like suggest them that what sort of application will be better for them. For example, if you're going to choose T type of instances, so what is going to happen in that case? So T type of instances comes with a bustable CPU and with CPU credit as well, right? So if there is constant high load on your application, so in that particular case, it could be that going forward, maybe after 20 days, after 10 days, after 15 days, your application will become slow. Why? So the credit limit which is assigned to you maybe on daily basis or maybe on monthly basis, that depends like what type of instance you are going to have. So based on that particular component, your application will become super. Second thing, now if it is going to be CPU intensive, so obviously Sanjay, we are going to suggest here that the particular application which we need to use here, the particular type of instances are going to be C5 type, or maybe C6 type instances we are going to have it. That is going to be our job. But keep this
okay, so
the particular type of instances which we are going to select here in the environment of load testing, in the environment of SIT environment, right? Same type of instances should be allocated here as well. Why is so? Because if we have done load testing on C5.4 XLR, so same type of instance family has to be selected here as well.
yeah, that's all good. Like, but the thing is that the developer will going to tell us like what's how much CPU we require. Is it right? Or that's what my question was like.
Okay.
Is developer will going to tell us
It's
like
not
how
going to
much
decide
CPU we
that
need?
particular component, like how many CPU they want. It could be possible because whenever they do load testing on their local environment after doing development, if they do any, right?
Okay.
They have a different sort of hardware. It could be possible the developers are provided with 16 GB of RAM and maybe 8 CPU, maybe 16 CPU laptop, right? Not more than they get. But when we talk about like server hardware and the laptop hardware, so there is a like huge difference. It could be possible if a developer is suggesting that they need at least 8 CPUs. But when you launch your application into production environment or maybe into this SIT environment, you get a lot better performance. So it could be possible when a developer was asking for 8 CPUs, it could be possible that same number of requests can be served within like with the help of 2 CPUs only. So why we are going to do like load testing? Because we are going to have an optimized hardware. So load testing is done in order to do the optimization only, right? To do the right, to have the right sizing of instance rather than having 8 CPU, because obviously if 8 CPUs are configured within a EC2 machine, 8 CPUs are selected. So we will have to pay for all the 8 CPUs. Others are sitting idle and we are paying for all. So that is why we need to identify a right size of instance. Let us say we know very well that if load is 1 or 2, that is completely fine. There is nothing there is nothing wrong in that, right? But same type of instance we need to configure here as well. So yes, developer can tell you that this is going to be CPU intensive application, but the particular load testing will be done here with the help of your QA engineers. So this will be done in order to like go for right sizing of instance. Developer can definitely tell you this is CPU intensive or this is memory intensive, but how much memory do they need? What sort of parameters are supposed to be there? How they are going to tune their application? That sort of things will be decided at the time of SIT. It means system integration testing and load testing.
Okay. Done. Yeah. Good.
So, does that answer your question, Sanjay?
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
Okay, so it is not developer, it is not DevOps engineer, it is not QA engineer who can define. It is the particular system itself based on the performance. What we want and what system is providing, we have to define. Because see, it is SIT environment. Let us say if 2 CPUs are not going to be good enough. So what we are going to do here is we are going to add number of more CPUs within our environment, and after that once again we will do the testing. Right? Until unless we meet the at least required threshold, we are not going to leave the load testing. So let us say if we want that one server should be serving at least 8,000 users, right? That is our basic requirement. So we might keep on adding new instances here. We might keep on adding like bigger type of instances within this particular scenario, right? So I hope this particular defines that how do we decide number of CPUs, how do we define like desired, minimum and maximum, right? So guys, the particular environment which we are going to have here, let us say one server is serving 5,000 customers or 5,000 requests per second we are going to have, and 5 servers are able to serve 25,000 requests here. So same number of requests we are going to configure here at this particular point. So minimum number are going to be that which we have done testing here. Maximum number will be a little higher only. Reason being because if our team is saying that we are expecting minimum 25,000 customers or minimum 25,000 transactions per second we are expecting. So we need to have minimum number of servers as per load testing. Desired, we might have a little extra or maybe equal to minimum, and maximum number should be defined maybe like 20 to 30% extra traffic we can expect. So let us say if minimum is 10 and maximum should be kept 15 here, because that will be based on auto scaling group rules which you are going to place in your auto scaling group, right? So before declaring number of servers within your environment, guys, we have to ensure that based on load testing use cases, we define the number of minimum, maximum desired servers here, right? Are we clear with this? Yes, guys, are we clear with this? Guys, any questions so far if you have?
No.
Sir, I have, but it's out of course. But like regarding like how we can when we are going to do SIT, the generating load, different kind of loads. So
Okay.
maybe
So for generating different kind of load, you might have Postman. There are
Postman, yeah.
of API manager. Like you can use Postman or maybe like you can use Caesar. There are different type of tools, and these tools are used basically by the side of QA. It means quality assurance team is going to do that sort of testing.
Okay, so QA team will going to generate load for us, like for
Yes,
SIT.
QA team is going to generate load for us.
Okay, thank you.
And when we do load testing, so definitely if you have ever got a chance to do sort of load testing, so there are some ramps. Like first of all, we will initiate like for very first minute there are going to be 100 hits per second. Very next minute we will have 200, 300, 500. Maybe after that we will have 600. Like 100 hits per minute we can keep on increasing, right? Second thing,
Okay.
let us say now we have 100 hits, and next minute we might have 3,000 hits.
Okay.
So every single way we have to test during load testing environment. So let us say if our system is having like increasing traffic in a particular slope, so that could be a different scenario. But if there is spike in traffic, let us say right away we have 500 hits per second, and after 30 seconds we are having 5,000 hits per second, so our system can go down, right? So every single scope which we might face in production environment, we have to test within this environment, which is known as SIT. Because see, if something goes wrong here, and as we know this particular thing that we are doing load testing, so it could be possible that our application servers are working fine, that our web servers are working fine in case of load testing, but our application server starts going down. So we will have to ensure every single component, like what is performance of web server, what is performance of application server, and what is performance of database servers. Every single component we will have to monitor here, right?
Yes, sir. So another question, like the thing is, one question was like, what's the main difference between web server and application server? I tried to find online, but I didn't find any clear answer. Like says like web server can act as a application server can act as a web server. Have you got any like clear differentiation like in between?
Right. Definitely, I would love to answer that. So web server means, let us say you are going to host a static website.
Yep.
You can use Apache for that. If you're going to
Apache
website, you can
Apache
use Apache for that. Wait. Let me.
Yeah.
So there is no business logic actually. Let us say I want to post my resume over internet, right? That is going to be a static website for me, because I just want to like let people know about me, like what I have done, where I'm working, what is my past experience and all. But when we talk about, have you seen Flipkart? So let us say when we are talking to Flipkart, so Flipkart has a business logic that anyone without signing into their account, a person can add a product to cart, right? That is a business logic. But if you need to check out, you are a new customer on the website. So first of all, they will allow you to add a product to cart. But once you add product, you will have to create your account. You have to sign in before checkout, right? So that is a business logic. When you will create your user, so obviously database connectivity will be required. When you will add product to cart, so obviously there will be a particular separate cart section within your account. So that will be synced within your database. Once you go for checkout option, at that moment, they will ask you for your address, for your PIN number, phone number, and your residential address, your corresponding address, and other components, right? That is a business logic. So keep this thing in mind. If we are surfing a particular web page only, that is going to be a particular static website. One web server can serve that in a well manner. But when we talk about that we are going to have application server is basically used in order to serve some sort of business logic.
Okay.
If we talk about Tomcat, so Tomcat is a web server because it, like if you are going to host your application, if you are going to host your resume, so even Tomcat server is good enough and capable enough in order to let you host the particular resume over internet, right? But if you are going to place a jar file where like multiple line of code is available, where business logic is written, and that Tomcat can extract the jar file and based on the particular code written inside it, that will allow you to act as an application server as well. You can write your application logic, your business logic within Tomcat server. So does that answer your question?
So it means like a Tomcat or Apache can act as a web server as
an application server as well.
Okay, so but there is no clear like any particular server which we can say this is the application server or this is the web server.
No, actually, we cannot say that this is application, this is web server. That is going to be depending on your use case, how you are going to use a particular service. For example, you are going to purchase a car. That is all going to remain same. For example, you are planning to purchase a Swift car, Swift Desire, right? That you can purchase for your own purpose. So like registration plate will be of a different number. And if you're planning to like use that car as a taxi, so that is like number plate is going to be of different color, right? And of that,
you're right.
To remain same, honor is going to remain same, but the purpose will get changed. So based on your use case, the particular server will act as a different identity.
Okay. For example, S3 is like providing a static website, but it's not like, can we say that thing is a web server, S3 acting as a web server?
S3 is acting as a web server, but you cannot place your jar or WAR file. So it cannot be treated as an application server.
Okay. Okay, yeah, S3 can act as a can as a web server, but
yes. So in fact, S3, your Apache, not Apache Tom, Apache web server and Nginx. These are web servers only.
No, sir, Apache, we can install like WordPress, that sort of applications, because WordPress is application.
WordPress is a particular component which is additionally configured. So you need to configure Apache in order to host WordPress.
Okay.
So if we want to provide you business logics,
and
your MySQL database is going to store data, and Apache will be web server for that. So you can talk about over here we have Apache, here we have web server, and finally we have database.
Okay.
So within a single server, we configure all the components like web server, application, and database.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
So now let us move a little ahead here. So guys, there is a particular situation when a person might ask you, okay, what if I would not like to have all the requests coming to my load balancer? I would like to have some sort of caching mechanism. What will you do? What will you do in order to configure caching? Yes, guys, what will you do in order to configure caching? Let me tell you that particular part here. So guys, there is a particular term known as CDN.
CloudFront.
Obviously, like
content delivery network.
It is CloudFront, but it could be known as maybe like different big vendors are available. Maybe it could be Akamai. It could be CloudFront. It could be Cloudflare. Different vendors are there. So why do you use CloudFront, guys? In a nutshell, I'm going to explain that today. Otherwise, in detail, we will discuss it later on. So guys, how we are going to do it? So first of all, we have a particular like CDN server. So DNS will forward request to CDN, and CDN has two type of features. If it is static content, CDN will cache it here. Now there will be no direct connectivity between DNS and load balancer. Every single request which we are going to plan, which we need to redirect, so that particular request will come by this particular way. DNS will forward request to CDN server. Now CDN server will forward request to load balancer, and same process is going to go ahead here, right? So guys, CDN is content delivery network. All the static data, whatever you want and whatever your developer suggests, you can cache here. And based
Okay.
on a particular TTL, like time to live, you can cache your content here maybe for half an hour, for 15 minutes, for a day, for 72 hours, maybe for a week or for a month as well, right? And this particular component is used in order to in order to better your customer experience. For example, that customer, let us say customer is sitting in US and the website is hosted in India. So the particular latency which was supposed to be over that particular network, so that data will be served from a nearby location. We will discuss this component when we will talk about CDN in detail, right? Okay, so now we have like DNS will forward request to CDN. If the data is cached here, data is available at this particular component, that it will serve the customer from here itself. If it requires some sort of dynamic data, or maybe the particular data is not available at this particular point, so request will be sent to load balancer, then target group, then after this particular target group, then after database. Once again, if it is static, CDN will cache the request once again based on your TTL, based on your configuration settings, and once again it will start serving the same sort of content here itself. Right? Are we clear with this?
Sir, so it means like CDN can work as a cache server as well.
Yes, CDN can work as a cache server, but for static files only.
For static files only. So and so it means like the CDN cache the static content for a certain time, like the TTL will play the role. Is it right?
You're right. So the particular TTL which we are going to define. So for that particular time period only, CDN is going to cache the data, and after that, once the particular TTL expires, so the very next request for the same file, if that comes onto CDN, so CDN will forward that request directly to load balancer, because it does not, it will flush the data from its content network.
So it means, can we configure like CDN that what sort of data, static data?
Yes. Maybe if it is a CS file, it is JS file, it is maybe any like PDF file, any MP4 file, any video file. So whatever content you want, you can configure here, like what sort of files are supposed to be cached here.
Okay.
So sir, there is one more concept of regional edge cache. So does this come here itself only?
So regional, okay, let me tell you, like whatever CDN you are going to have. So like if we talk about Akamai, so Akamai has maybe 1,000 of edge locations around the world. Right? So let us say if a user is coming from Ireland, right? So data will be served from nearby edge location only. If a user is coming from Nepal, so data is going to be served from there only. Let us say if a user is like coming from maybe Germany, maybe Russia, so whatever nearby edge location they have, so data will be served from there only.
So it means like because CDN is as a service or a server, a machine somewhere in the in AWS environment. Okay, so that has a different like 1,000 edge points. So where the cache will be stored, like it has any central server, or it going to save on the
it
edge
does not
location?
have a central server. So first of all, whenever we are going to like enable this particular mechanism, so all the data will be replicated to all the locations. Whatever location you prefer, let us say if you have your user base in India only, so all the particular edge locations within India region, whatever AWS has, your data will be replicated to all the locations.
So it would be automatic, or that we have to decide?
Yes, it would be automatic and taken care from the side of Akamai's CloudFront, Cloudflare, whatever like CDN provider you are using. So like that particular data replication part will be handled from the side of that CDN provider only.
Okay.
So okay, guys, now let us talk about some other components here. So let us say if we have multiple web servers available, so there will be a question like how do you like do deployment on this? So guys, for doing deployment onto these particular sort of servers, we are going to have a particular component known as Jenkins. So Jenkins server will be placed in such a in such a location where from all these web servers, maybe these are going to be web server, maybe these are going to be application server and other component. These components will be okay. These particular components will be connected with the help of the Jenkins server, and we are going to use Jenkins for doing deployments here, right? Because see, whenever we are talking about connectivity, so we need connectivity here. So maybe on the same server, this is not recommended though, but definitely if you have a very high-end configuration, if you are using very like stable server, you can use Ansible as well. We can configure Ansible and Jenkins on the same server. Why it is so? Because sometimes it happens and we need to provide or we need to like execute any Ansible playbook from Jenkins server itself, right? So in that case, if Ansible and Jenkins are working on both, and because see, Ansible are just like programming files, YAML files are there. So we can use Ansible as Jenkins server, or you can call that we can use Jenkins as Ansible server as well. So both the components can be installed, can be used on the same physical or maybe same virtual machine, right? Because we need a user which will have admin access onto these servers wherever we are going to configure components. Right? So Ansible will be used for CM like configuration management. Let me define here CM, configuration management, and Jenkins is going to be used for CI/CD. Continuous integration and continuous deployment, right? Moreover, if someone is going to ask you, okay, how do you where do you store your source code? So guys, you can talk about here the particular component which is known as Bitbucket or maybe Git. For Git, you can give some of the name, maybe Bitbucket, maybe GitHub, maybe GitLab, and any other name you can define. So guys, in most of cases, what happens if you are going to use any pro version of this, so definitely you get all the features. Otherwise, what you can do here is you can use Git on your local environment as well. As Jenkins server you are running on any EC2 machine, so same way you can install Bitbucket, maybe GitLab onto your local environment as well. Like you can have a local server, on that you can keep your code and you can sync that server along with your Jenkins. Like Jenkins will be integrated with GitHub server. Whatever like GitHub, Bitbucket, Git, GitLab, whatever you are using, that will be integrated with Jenkins. Your developers will have access to this. Now Jenkins will be integrated with GitHub whenever you need to deploy. So Jenkins will download the code from GitHub repository right away before the deployment or before going for any build creation, right? Then a person might ask you, okay, then how will you ensure monitoring of this server? So definitely guys, what is going to happen? We will have Prometheus. We will have Prometheus and Grafana or Kibana. Right, these sort of component we will install on one server, or maybe like Prometheus on one, Kibana or Grafana on any other instances. Now the particular exporters, let me define here like here, all the EC2 instances so there will be a component known as node exporter will be installed on the all EC2 machines, and whenever we are going to create AMI which will be associated, which will be configured within this auto scaling group, so that AMI will include the node exporter, right? So as and when new server will be created, so that will automatically start sending that particular newly created server will start sending that particular stats of that EC2 machine automatically to Prometheus, and Prometheus will start populating the particular data onto our like Grafana or Kibana dashboard. Are we clear with that, guys?
So this Grafana and Kibana is like some sort of similar to Prometheus, or is like
No, actually Prometheus is a monitoring engine.
okay.
Grafana and Kibana are the visualization dashboard.
Okay, so Nagios is a different thing, is it right? Or is
Nagios
the same
provides
thing?
its own GUI. Prometheus has a GUI itself, but that is not that fruitful because like you cannot do a lot of visualization, a lot of graphics you cannot use on the top of Prometheus.
So why then we use this Prometheus? Why you are not
So
doing
Prometheus
Magus?
is written basically in Go language that is really fast, reliable, and like it uses time series database, right? And it is really faster. Like with lower number of resources, you can monitor high volume of data.
Okay.
So that is what it does. So guys, this is how you are going to explain, like you are using Bitbucket, Jenkins, Ansible, maybe Prometheus, Grafana, Kibana you are using CDN, you have like load balancer, elastic load balancer you have, like you have internet facing load balancer for web server, you have internal load balancer, internal application load balancer you have for your application servers, and you have network load balancer for your proxy SQL servers, which is placed on the top of like your database. You are using auto scaling group here. So guys, what do you think? Is it going to be fruitful?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. If we can do that things.
So guys, I'm quite sure that if you guys are able to explain this much about your infrastructure, then I'm 100% sure about it that no one will have a question that yes, you have not worked on this, right?
Sir, actually, as right now, currently giving the interviews only. So I just want to ask one thing, like you have mentioned here, Git bucket. How will I elaborate like I use with Jenkins? Can you please tell me this thing once again?
Okay, so all the source code, like this is known as SCM tool. This particular component is known as SCM tool, like source code management tool it is known as, right? So whenever we are going to talk about SCM, so like all the developers are going to create, and obviously like this is managed either from the side of developers or from the DevOps team. So you will create repository here. Developer will be responsible to create multiple branches here. And whenever developer is planning to push the code, right? So developer will give you either a branch name or a tag name. We will discuss about this component because see, today we are going to discuss about this entire infrastructure which we are discussing right now. But going forward, we are going to discuss these individual components as well, like how does Git work, what are the components here, where from you can read more about it, that sort of thing we are going to discuss. So you will have to tell the particular interviewer that all the developers are keeping the code onto Bitbucket or maybe like Git, which is SCM tool. Then we integrate Jenkins with Git in order to do build and deployment.
Okay.
So at the time of building, like whenever we are going to build a job, so at that moment, Jenkins server, as it is authenticated by Git, like we can configure with the help of SSH or maybe we can configure with the help of HTTP or HTTPS in order to do the code from here to here.
Correct.
Right? So once the code is downloaded, after that we will have multiple tools with Jenkins, maybe Ant, Maven, Gradle, or maybe Node, Go, React, whatever like sort of programming language we are going to use. We will have all the software available on Jenkins server as well.
Okay.
Of Java we can have, right? Once the code is downloaded, we will build a particular jar or maybe var, maybe ER, NAR sort of file we are going to create that will be defined in the pom.xml file, right? Once the build is created, then we can push the code to these web servers, and that will be different strategy. Like how do we do deployment? We will discuss within coming sessions here.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I got it.
So guys, I hope that if you guys are able to explain this much things, then definitely no one will ask you that, okay, that you have not worked in this sort of environment. But yes, couple of things are still pending here, which we are going to discuss during individual sessions. For example, if I talk about, okay, what are the rules you have configured on elastic load balancer? What what type of instance you have selected here? Why did you select network load balancer here? Why did you not select network load balancer here? How do you secure it? What are the particular listener type you have available? That sort of thing we are going to discuss within coming sessions, right?
Yes, sir.
So yes, guys, any questions so far? If you have, you are free to ask. I would love to answer the question.
So please share this flowchart over the WhatsApp. It would be great for us.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Yeah. Because it helps us a lot at the last time of when we have to prepare for the interview.
Yes, sure, guys, sure, I'll do that. Need not to worry. So, guys, I'm going to stop recording of this session, and it could be possible I might post it on YouTube as well because this is for demo only, right? Going forward, I'll keep all the sessions private. Right, guys? So well, guys, if you have to share anything, if you have any feedback, so please let me know, and you can share your contact numbers right away, as we will add you in a different contact group. So going forward, like we will have a separate group, we will have closed group for this batch, right?
Okay.